Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're decoding a truly fascinating psychological framework known as the health belief model. If you've ever wondered exactly why we make the health choices we do, and let's be honest, why it can be so incredibly hard to just do the things we know are good for us, well, you are absolutely in the right place.
So let's just dive right into this. Before we even unpack the theory itself, I want you to ask yourself a pretty personal question. Why is changing our habits so unbelievably difficult? I mean, we all know eating well, exercising, and avoiding things like tobacco are good for us. The information is out there. Yet actually translating that knowledge into daily, consistent action, it often feels like climbing Mount Everest, doesn't it? To really show you the sheer scale of this challenge, take a look at this shocking statistic from our source data. Get this, only 3% of US adults actually adhere to 4 basic healthy lifestyle characteristics. We're talking about the absolute basics here, just not smoking, getting regular physical activity, keeping a healthy weight, and eating some fruits and vegetables. 3%. That leaves a staggering 97% non-adherence rate. It's a massive challenge.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. The Behavior Change Challenge. 2. The Health Belief Model. 3. Threat, susceptibility, and severity. 4. Action, benefits versus barriers. 5. Cues and self-efficacy. And finally, 6. Real-world applications.
All right, Part 1, the Behavior Change Challenge.
This quote from the source material really hits the nail on the head. Human behavior patterns represent the single most prominent domain influencing our health prospects. What that means is, modifying our risky behaviors is, without a doubt, public health's greatest hurdle. It isn't just about having the right medical treatments available, it's about navigating the notoriously stubborn, totally complex maze of human psychology.
Moving on to Part 2, the Health Belief Model.
So, to solve this problem, we introduce the hero of our story today. Developed way back in the 1950s by psychologists at the U.S. Public Health Service, this model was actually first created to figure out why people weren't participating in things like tuberculosis screenings. It basically acts as a diagnostic tool for the mind. As you can see mapped out here, it suggests that our health-related actions depend on a very specific recipe of psychological factors all happening at the exact same time.
Part 3. Threat, susceptibility, and severity.
The very first core pillar of this model is perceived susceptibility. Basically, a person absolutely has to believe they are personally vulnerable to a disease before they'll even consider lifting a finger to change. If someone thinks, oh, heart disease only happens to older folks, or hey, nobody in my family gets cancer, their perceived susceptibility is effectively zero. Denial is a super powerful thing, right? Without that genuine feeling of personal vulnerability, the behavior simply stays the same. The second pillar is perceived severity, or in other words, how serious the threat is. An individual has to believe that the consequences of actually getting that disease would be devastating. If they think an illness is just a minor inconvenience, like a common cold, they won't act. But, and here's where the magic happens, when you combine high perceived susceptibility with high perceived severity, you create what the model calls a perceived threat. That threat is the spark that actually ignites the motivation to change.
Part 4. Action. Benefits versus barriers. Okay, so a threat is established. Our brains immediately start weighing the required actions. This brings us to perceived benefits. This is the belief that taking a specific recommended action, like hitting the gym every day or overhauling your diet, will actually work to reduce that threat. If someone is terrified of heart disease, they still have to genuinely believe that going for a run is going to help prevent it. But on the flip side of that equation, we have perceived barriers. And let's be real. These are the incredibly tangible costs of taking action. We're not just talking about the financial cost of a gym membership, though for sure that's part of it. Perceived barriers include the time it takes, the physical exhaustion of working out, the inconvenience, and just the massive mental effort required to break an old, comfortable habit.
So we all experience this constant internal tug of war. I want you to imagine an old-school set of scales in your brain. On one side, you're constantly weighing the perceived threat of a disease. On the other side, you're calculating the difference between those perceived benefits and the perceived barriers. It's simple math for your brain. If the barriers, like losing time with family or the sheer physical effort, outweigh the benefits, the behavior just will not change, no matter how terrified you are of the disease.
Part 5. Cues and self-efficacy. To finally tip those mental scales toward action, the model needs 2 final ingredients. First up, cues to action.
These are triggers that make a health issue immediately salient and prompt you to do something. They can be internal, like feeling a sudden, sharp pain in your chest, or they can be external, like seeing a stark public health poster, getting a text reminder from your doctor, or even just chatting with a friend who recently got sick. These cues are the catalyst.
Now here's a really interesting point. When this model was originally developed in the 1950s, it focused mostly on simple one-off actions, like getting a single vaccine. But modern lifestyle changes, like totally quitting smoking or losing significant weight, are way more complex. Because of that, researchers later added self-efficacy to the model. This is simply a person's rock-solid confidence in their own ability to actually pull off the new behavior. Because honestly, if you don't believe you can succeed in overcoming those daunting barriers, you won't even try.
Let's look at how this whole model plays out in real life. Imagine a woman just sitting in her living room watching TV. Suddenly, an ad about heart disease comes on. Boom, that's her external cue to action. The ad makes her reflect on her own family history of heart issues, which immediately shoots her perceived susceptibility and severity way up. Now she knows exercise works, that's the perceived benefit, but she's incredibly busy. Ultimately, she figures out how to confidently carve out just 20 minutes a day. That demonstrates the self-efficacy required to overcome her perceived barriers. The scales tip, and she finally starts working out.
Finally, Part 6. Real-world applications.
Let's look at how public health officials use these exact constructs out in the real world. Take a smoking cessation program. We know we can't just tell people to stop smoking. It doesn't work. Instead, they systematically target every single psychological construct. They highlight personal lung cancer risks to raise susceptibility. They share stark mortality data to raise severity. For the benefits, they highlight the huge financial savings. But most importantly, they lower the barriers by providing free nicotine patches, they send daily SMS reminders as continuous cues, and they provide skills training to boost that crucial self-efficacy. It's the whole shebang.
And we see that exact same systematic approach applied to sedentary behavior too. Like this great example from our source material about an intervention in an urban settlement. To raise severity, workshops educate the residents that hypertension is a silent killer. But they don't just scare people and walk away. Simultaneously, they drastically lower the barriers by organizing exercise groups that are free, safe, and right in the neighborhood. And for that vital cue to action, they set up local WhatsApp messaging groups run by the neighbors themselves to share reminders and success stories. Brilliant, right?
So, what this all means is that changing behavior isn't just about raw willpower. It's about altering those mental scales of threats, benefits, and barriers. As we wrap up this explainer today, I want you to look inward for a second. Ask yourself, what is the single biggest perceived barrier currently stopping you from making a healthy change in your own life? And more importantly, what cue to action might finally help you overcome it? Think about that for a bit. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.